Welcome to Chat Cyber, a podcast on all things cyber policy where we explore key issues and discuss policy strategies with industry experts.
Hey everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chat Cyber, Cyber Florida's policy podcast. As always, I'm your host, James Jacobs, Cyber Florida's Associate Director for Policy and Partnership.
And I am your co-host, Jordan Deiuliis, Cyber Policy Analyst at Cyber Florida. Before we move forward, I want to apologize. I lost my voice recently, so I apologize to our listeners, to our guests. I'm slowly getting it back, but I sound a little bit different today.
She still sounds better than my country twang, so we'll let it slide, Jordan. So we're joined today by Mr. Frank Cilluffo. Jordan, could you give us a little bit of information about Frank's background?
Yeah, absolutely. So Frank is the director of Auburn University's McCrary Institute for Cyber and Critical Infrastructure Security. Prior to joining the McCrary Institute, Frank served as an associate vice president at George Washington University, where he founded and led the Center for Cyber and Homeland Security. He also served in the White House, where he was appointed a special assistant to the president for Homeland Security. Frank was a member of the Cyberspace Solarium Commission and the DHS Advisory Council, and is routinely called upon to testify before Congress and advise senior government and military officials on matters relating to cybersecurity, counterterrorism, and emergency management. He has numerous publications in prominent journals, magazines, and newspapers worldwide, and currently serves on the editorial advisory board for military and strategic affairs. Cyber Florida is incredibly lucky because Frank also serves as the chair of our board of advisors. So Frank, thank you so much for being here with us today. It's an honor to have you on the podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, James. Looking forward to it. Cyber Florida does really important work and privileged to play a small role in hopefully advancing the ball and making our country more secure. So thank you.
We really appreciate you, to reiterate what Jordan said, both your service on the board and being here with us today. And I can tell you, since I've come on board, Frank has been one of the most interesting people I've had the opportunity to meet, and getting to know you has been a pleasure.
Because I've never had an unspoken thought, right, James?
It's been wonderful, though, man. You really are one of the foremost voices in this space, so we appreciate your involvement. So we'll just jump right into it. Jordan mentioned your involvement with the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about what the Cyberspace Solarium Commission is, why it was created, its purpose, and then maybe share a little bit about the McCrary Institute as well and the work that you guys are doing there?
Thank you, James, and happy to. So I was privileged to serve as a commissioner on the U.S. Cyberspace Solarium Commission. It was stood up in 2019 by Congress. I think there was growing recognition that doing the same old is not getting the outcomes and the solutions we as a country needed around cybersecurity. It came out of the National Defense Authorization Act. It was very unique in that it included both executive and legislative branch leaders. So you had two senators, in this case, Angus King, who served as chair, Ben Sass, who was the other senator nominated, two members of Congress, Mike Gallagher was vice chair, Jim Langevin was the other member. But it also included all the deputy secretaries of the key executive branch agencies. So Congress and executive branch in the same room deliberating doesn't happen all that often, except in an oversight kind of way. But it included the deputy secretary of DHS, deputy secretary of defense, deputy DNI, FBI director. And then there were a handful of us that were selected on the outside, ostensibly to keep them honest, ostensibly subject matter experts. But I was privileged to be one of those. Net, and this was stood up during the first Trump administration. So politics was everywhere. But this commission, you would have never had a sense of who sat on what aisle and what positions they were taking, which is kind of refreshing. And I hope that there are going to be other issues that are so big for the country that they can be done in a truly nonpartisan subject matter kind of way. The commission had in its initial report 82 recommendations. Subsequently, it had another 20 or so, 25. I think the net was 115 recommendations overall. 80% of those have been enacted or passed into law. It's hard to get a post office named into law these days. So I think that a lot of the success has to do with our very active congressional members and a very supportive administration at the time. So it now lives on in a nonprofit as CSC 2.0, which is run by the former executive director, Admiral Mark Montgomery, is still driving it there, and the McCrary Institute, which I have the privilege to direct, is also supporting that effort. The McCrary Institute, I'll give a 30-second snapshot here. I like to think of ourselves as a think and do tank. There are a lot of think tanks around town doing interesting work. There are a number of universities such as USF, Auburn, and others doing very important academic work and research. There are a number of FFRDCs that are doing applied research and operational support. No one's bringing all that end to end together. And that is what I think we're striving to do and aspiring to do and doing to one extent or another. We've got a presence in DC, a presence in Auburn, which is our tech bench, and a presence in Huntsville, which is partially test and evaluation, partially operational support. But net, all things cyber, critical infrastructure, and ensuring that our systems are resilient and secure. That's our emphasis.
That's great. Thank you. So we are going to move right into the report that you all just recently released. So the McCrary Institute and the Cyberspace Solarium Commission 2.0. It's called Securing America's Digital Future. Tell us a little bit about how that report came about, why you guys decided to write it, what was the purpose? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And part of it tees up really well with the previous question, since I did have the opportunity to sort of sit in through the Cyberspace Solarium Commission. We recognized the need to do something similar with an incoming administration. We released the report a couple weeks before the election, very intentionally, because this was not intended to be red or blue, but red, white, and blue, and same recommendations we would have put forward regardless of who won the election. It included cyber advisors to the last 5 presidents, so I'm not sure anyone's actually had that in a group all the way back to, we were barely calling it cyber during the Clinton administration, but there was a cyber lead for that all the way through to the current administration. We ultimately, ironically, came up with almost 80 recommendations as well. There's a trend here somewhere. That was unintentional, but we actually came up with 8 major lines of effort and between 3 and 7 recommendations in each of those areas. I think many of these recommendations are sort of took stock of where we are, what's working, what's not, what we need to do kind of going forward. And I mean, if I were to go over all the recommendations, I would put you and your listeners and viewers to sleep. So I won't do that. But the general parameters were: 1 was harmonizing the regulatory landscape. 2 is improving coordination across federal agencies, which sounds very boring, but if the plumbing ain't right, we're not going to get the water going from the house and throughout the house and elsewhere. Thirdly, to provide exercise playbooks for stakeholders to prepare for and respond to cyber attacks. So I kind of feel like we've seen, no surprise who's coming after us. It sort of bugs me a little bit that we're trying to reinvent the wheel each time. We kind of know who the perpetrators are. We should know what their vulnerabilities are, and we should know what we need to do to sort of go forward. But bottom line, happy to go into, I believe we've blamed the victim for too long. We need to lean forward. We're never going to defend and firewall our way out of this problem alone. So how do we marshal and mobilize the resources of our national security community to actually impose cost and consequence on bad actors? So there's something in there for pretty much everyone, strengthening diplomacy, harmonization of regulatory issues. Happy to go into any of those that you'd like to, but that's sort of a pretty clumsy explanation of what we've got going on there.
No, that's great. And I think a lot of the questions that we've got for you go into some of those recommendations. So when I was reading through the report, it was incredibly interesting. And when I was reading through, I noticed that you make an argument in your report that effective cybersecurity strategy is essential to enhancing America's economic competitiveness. I think that it's safe to say that most view cybersecurity through the lens of national security, but not necessarily economic competitiveness. Can you explain that a little bit further?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I have a hard time delineating national security from economic security these days. Is it a national security issue? Absolutely. I mean, cyber is its own domain; it transcends air, land, sea, space. But our entire economy is also connected, and to me, these aren't either or propositions. It's yes, yes, and yes. It's all of the above and both. But in this case, in particular, a lot of the instruments we bring to the national security fight are insufficient when it comes to cyber related issues. I can't tell you with any confidence that we could protect everything everywhere all the time from every perpetrator and every modality of attack when it comes to cyber. What I can tell you is we better be ready to bounce back. We better be ready to bounce back fast, and we better be willing to impose some cost. Otherwise, we're going to be seeing the same movie over and over and over and over and over and over again. And I feel like we're in that mode right now. So to me, it is a national security issue. That's my historical background, but it's much more than simply national security issues. Our economy is 100% tied up in cyber. If that's not humming the way it should, we got problems.
Indeed. So another recommendation you made in the report focuses on the harmonization of cybersecurity regulation. You mentioned how incredibly urgent this task is due to vulnerabilities that the current regulatory landscape creates. Can you tell our listeners what the current regulatory landscape looks like and what you believe needs to be done to create a coherent, streamlined regulatory framework?
Absolutely. Have you ever seen a spaghetti chart? It's literally, it's like big Gordian
We've seen
knot.
plenty of those in Florida the last couple months.
I'm sure you have, and we all do in our own internal organizations as well. But the current system is a patchwork of redundant and often cumbersome rules, and they were largely created within the agencies that have regulatory oversight. So sort of in a vacuum, there was no belly button. There was no one looking at it across the entire landscape. And my bigger issue is not only does it lead to sunken costs and drive up costs for our owner operators, our private sector frontline warriors in this, but it also creates a culture of compliance. And I'm not suggesting compliance isn't important, but it also leads to a check the box sort of mentality where if I do this, and this, check the box, I'm done. Lowest common denominator.
Lowest common denominator. What can I do to comply and be done? Not necessarily what can I do to be secure.
And what gets measured gets done. The real question is, are we truly measuring what matters? And to from my perspective, right now, it's sort of this patchwork that you need to, we suggested that the National Cyber Director, which has the remit and the ability to look across the various alphabet soup of agencies in Washington, be empowered to streamline all of this. And I'm not suggesting we don't need some regulations. I'm sure we will. But we need to do it in a way that's manageable, smart, and actually leads to security bang for the buck. I mean, there's an old saying in our business, security is always too much until the day it's not enough. And I'm not sure we all know exactly how much is enough, but one thing we do know is Policy without resources is rhetoric. We've got to marry up those resources to actually drive outcomes that we're looking for. So we urge, and there has been some momentum toward this. Senator Peters, Senate Homeland Security, is a bill focused on some of this, and I think it has genuine bipartisan support because. Again, that's not a political set of issues. At the end of the day, if there's cost that is not leading and yielding fruit and benefit, we got to roll that back.
Yeah, absolutely. So another one of your recommendations, focuses on cost imposition and deterrence, and you discussed this concept of defend forward. Can you explain that concept a bit further and tell us what a cybersecurity defend forward strategy looks like?
Thanks, Jordan. This is a very complex set of issues, so I'm going to do it sort of the Cliff Notes version. But all things said and done, and I think I mentioned this earlier, we've had this. Anytime an incident occurs, you blame the victim for being hacked. That's not to suggest that companies and owners and operators don't have a responsibility to do more. They do. But if you were to look at traditional crimes, physical crimes, the likelihood of getting caught, the likelihood of succeeding, the likelihood of being prosecuted and arrested is actually quite high. In the cyber environment, it's less than 0.5%. So there's very little consequence for bad cyber behavior. And again, how many typhoons are we going to hear about next? Whether it's Salt or Vault, or we know the Communist Party of China is deeply involved in cyber activity. We know Russia not only directly but also provides a safe haven for a disproportionate number of the ransomware gangs that are operating in Russia or the former Soviet bloc. We know Iran has continued to initiate its cyber activity, not only in the region, but also pointing the cannons to the United States. And North Korea is sort of an outlier. Traditionally, we like to say that criminals try to penetrate the state through corruption, co-option, and everything else. In North Korea's case, it's the opposite. The state is penetrating organized crime because that's their way to get into the economy, since they've been cut out of the legitimate economy. But all things said and done, putting up another firewall, defending our way out of this problem. Do we need to do more there? Yes, but that will never be sufficient. That will never tilt in our favor. At best, you're staying even, and that's almost an impossible task in and of itself. So defend forward is a concept that the Department of Defense put forward in its defense strategy, I'd say about 3-4 years ago, where they are starting to, and General Nakasone, when he was head of U.S. Cyber Command and the director of National Security Agency, was starting to get the Department of Defense to lean forward and be much more proactive, in this case, defending forward, since if we started our borders, the cyber border, game over, we've already lost. And the broader concept here is, I'm not a cowboy. I don't say we just start shooting zeros and ones at every perpetrator and adversary. But if there's not some concern that there will be consequence, whether it's economic consequence, whether it's judicial and someone will go behind bars, or whether it's military and national security, don't act surprised. Don't be that ostrich with its head in the sand that acts surprised when it gets kicked in the most obvious place. I feel like that's where we are now, and we've got to switch that dynamic.
So the report also mentions, Frank, the importance of the U.S. leading and shaping international standards and rules of behavior in cybersecurity. You specifically mentioned the potential role of the U.S. Department of State in spearheading cyber diplomacy efforts. So maybe that's the diplomatic side of the force side that you're just talking about. What role does cybersecurity play in U.S. foreign policy strategy?
That's a great question, James. And again, that has many layers to it. I don't think you can do bilateral and foreign policy without an awareness for cyber. And I don't think you can do cyber if you're in the intelligence business and national security business and not have an awareness of bad actors and what their intentions and capabilities are. The threat comes in various shapes, sizes, flavors, and forms. It's not a one-size-fits-all sort of approach. So I think you have seen the Cyber Diplomacy Act was passed about 4 years ago, which did designate a new bureau for cyber within State Department. I think Nate Fick's been running that exceedingly well in his current role and an ambassadorial role. We need to double down on that, and I think when we talk about a lot of the international rulemaking, I'm not a huge proponent of the United Nations and GGE, but they all have a role. If nothing else, do no harm, because at the end of the day, you have China and others that are taking advantage of these large organizations, international organizations and treaties and the like, and they'll ultimately usurp some of these capabilities. And this may not, I don't want to sound alarmist here, but, I grew up knowing democracy was the way, and I have full confidence, but we can't take it for granted. Autocratic regimes are running circles technologically, and if they start getting the rules in their favor, then I think that the world I grew up in could look very different for my children and grandchildren. I want to make sure that that is not the case. So I still think that there's the realpolitik side. We haven't even gotten that done right yet, but we can't ignore, or if we do, we ignore so at our peril, because others are taking advantage of that vacuum and filling it pretty quickly. And the numbers are actually staggering when you look at, just take Communist Party of China. When you look at diplomatic officers on their side versus U.S., it's going to be about 100 to 1 net. And they're in all of these organizations. And we've sort of ceded some of that, and I don't think we can afford to do that forever.
Thank you for those thoughts, Frank. Couple of follow-up questions. First of all, I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you so much for including our director, Ernie Ferrarosso.
And Ernie was a fantastic. We had honestly a kick butt group. It was a lot of fun. Very genuinely people wanting to contribute to the cause, and Ernie, as always, did a great job.
Well, thank you so much for that. Much like myself, they keep Ernie and I around for the comedic relief in these exercises. But thank you so much for letting him be part of that. We were so inspired by the product. Ernie was so inspired by being able to participate in it that we at Cyber Florida, we've decided to prepare a similar transition document that's Florida specific for the next administration change here in the governor's office.
That's awesome.
In a couple of years. Understand that you've looked
at
this
nationally.
That's a great initiative. Thank you. Understand that you guys have looked at this nationally and you've made your career out of this. Do you have any, the issues are the same in so many ways, but do you have any guidance for what best practices might look like at the state level, keeping in mind that the majority of our audience, they're staffers to Florida members, they're agency people here in Florida?
James, that's a great question. And this is not meant to be sort of a hackneyed response. Bring a good team together, build trust. Trust is everything around some of this. And I would say even in the military, national security, trust takes a long time to build. It can evaporate like that. So setting some of the baselines and guidelines around that is essential. I mean, truth is state, local, tribal, territorial, they have the same targets on their backs that the big agencies have, and they don't have the same level of resources. They don't have the same workforce. So we've got to figure out how we can not let the front lines absorb all the pain, just like the private sector. How many companies went into business thinking they have to defend themselves against the Russian military or the Chinese military or the Chinese Iranian intelligence services? None. But that's sort of the world we're living in right now. So when I look at where the greatest need is around cyber right now, in addition to a lot of the national security issues, it's really enhancing small, medium-sized businesses who have the same footprint and attack surface that big companies do, and then state, local, tribal, territorial. So we've got to double down on those efforts. And I think Florida has a step up. It has a great tech base. It's focused on cyber for quite some time. It had the foresight to create Cyber Florida, and you've got a great set of universities that you can lean on. Of course, USF, top of the list, and others. But when you really get down to it, you're going to have to figure out how if everything is critical, nothing's critical. You're going to have the hard sort of discussions around how do you not spread peanut butter evenly across everything, but how do you get to the point where you can batten down risk in the smartest way, quickest. And to do something I would love to see all 50 states have a similar sort of process, because ultimately it's the agencies have to be empowered, and the agencies often are not fully recognized by the state governments, or they think it's still a IT problem. This is not an IT problem. This is modern society. Without a cyber capability, we don't have a functioning society. So getting some political leadership, engagement, ownership, awareness will be essential in all of this. So it's not only the cyber gals and guys. You got to make sure that those that ultimately ensure the budgets are passed are part of that discussion as well.
Frank, do you think that there's a regional way to tackle this? And what I mean by that is we're very, very proud of our partnership with you guys, very, very proud of our partnership with McCrary, the stuff we've done together in the past, the conversations we're having about things we could do in the future. Is there for sake of example, a southwest or southeast part of the United States regional approach that could be effective in some of these efforts?
Yeah, I think there has to be, because at the end of the day, think of it as, you know how our military is structured overseas. You have different combatant commands, sometimes for issues like Special Operations Command or Space Command, but also all the geographic locations, Europe, Pacific Command, etc. And when you start looking at the United States and the continental United States and our broader homeland, absolutely. If we don't, I mean, firstly, I think you get more bang for the buck, because I'm not sure any of our states have all the resources they need. But if they collectively can see what the needs are, I think you've got a much greater likelihood of advancing that ball. And then just think about it tactically and operationally. The grid doesn't know state borders alone. I mean, the reality is, or telecommunications or transportation hubs or rail, or you name the critical infrastructure sector. I think it's essential that we start looking at this regionally, and I think partnering with Cyber Florida, McCrary Institute, I think that's a very powerful combination there. That can help us build out some of that Southeast region. So I'm all in on that. I'm a huge proponent of that. This was the one recommendation I did not get over the goal line when I had the privilege to serve for President Bush. I said we needed to regionalize Homeland, because right now CBP has an office here, FEMA has an office there, CISA an office over there, and at some point you got to bring all these pieces together. And right now it's sort of it's not as robust as it could be, and I think that agnostic to what the feds think, I think it's in the state's prerogative and necessity to start thinking along these lines.
I think that we talked a decent amount of some of the recommendations that you laid out in this report, but we didn't get to all of them. I know like workforce development is in there, critical and emerging technologies is in there. So I know that this report lives or you can find it on the McCrary website, correct?
Correct. And
okay.
Please do download it.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's how I want to be able to direct people to where it lives so they can kind of take a further look at what we were discussing. But before we close out, is there anything that you think we haven't touched on that you think you want to speak to that you think is important for folks to hear, legislators? Anything else that we've missed?
You guys did a great job with the questions. You do important work. Empowering the work that you do is my biggest takeaway. And I mean, everyone, and this is not a cheesy soundbite, this is everyone's problem. Yeah. And until everyone steps up, we're not going to get to the place we all hope to get to. But good people, attracting that next generation, making sure we have strong women, getting those numbers up in the cyber field, I think is essential. Looking at, I recently hosted on our podcast a discussion around neurodiversity in cyber. If you think back to World War II, a lot of the most prominent cryptographers and cryptologists that ultimately won the war would not necessarily be deemed as doing well in a traditional sense. And they were the most important element to our future, I think, thinking a little bit differently about these problems. And then all things said and done, just doing it. Because I am tired of admiring problems. I want to be in the solutions space. Get things done. So anything we can do with you to get things done, and we do, I'm excited about. So thank you.
Well, Frank, you said it, and I make the joke all the time, and I make it repeatedly on here. I am the most untech savvy millennial ever. It's hilarious that I work in cybersecurity now, but what brought me to it, what I've seen everywhere, is it is a societal problem. It is no longer the IT guy's problem. It affects everything we do, from security to our economy. We can't thank you enough. We of all people know how busy you are. Frank, thank you so much for coming on. Also want to add, I'm 99% sure that we also have the report living on our Chat Cyber platform now too. Another easy place to assess it. Frank, any more closing words before we let you go?
No, thank you. Keep fighting the good fight. I appreciate it.
We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, Jordan will share any recent updates with the audience from Cyber Florida and the Shameless Plug. Thank you, guys.
Welcome to Cyber Florida's Shameless Plug with Jordan.
As we approach the holiday season, the Cyber Florida team is taking time to relax, recharge, and celebrate our successes of the past year. But as we enjoy the holiday cheer, we're also gearing up for something big. After the new year, we'll be diving headfirst into our biggest event of the year, the Sunshine Cyber Conference. This event will be held in Tampa on February 24th and 25th, and will feature exciting keynote speakers, interactive breakout sessions, and plenty of networking opportunities. With a goal of promoting ongoing connection, information sharing, and community building throughout Florida and beyond, it's definitely an event you won't want to miss. So I encourage you to check out cyberflorida.org for more information and for a full conference agenda. And from all of us at Cyber Florida, we wish you a happy holiday season and look forward to seeing you at the Sunshine Cyber Conference in the new year.
All opinions expressed by the Chat Cyber podcast participants are their own and do not exclusively represent the views and opinions of Cyber Florida.